Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic book. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episodes of Supergirl, Gotham, as well as Lucifer. First, starting off with this week's Supergirl, we had Supergirl, while she was helping some firefighters put out a fire in a building, she is like affected by this substance. At the time, she didn't really notice it, but she's affected by some substance that we don't know what it is. I mean, we end up finding out later on in the episode that substance that affected her was a synthetic kryptonite, specifically red kryptonite, which it didn't weaken her, but it affected her in a kind of rewired her brain, not making her act out of character, but it wasn't really just out of nowhere. It took like stuff that she might have thought or ever kept deep down and brought it to the surface. It's kind of like having, in a way it's kind of like having like her filter removed. So like any thought or anything she felt like doing, in her brain wouldn't recognize it as like, oh, this is a bad thing or a good thing. It's like, no, I want to do this thing, so I'm gonna do it, or I want to say this thing, so I'm gonna say it. So since we're on that subject, I am curious to anyone that might be a little bit more familiar with comic books. I mean, I'll probably end up looking this up myself, but I still would like someone's input on it. Is like multicolored kryptonite a big thing in comic books, or is that just something they make up for the TV shows? Because it was a pretty prominent thing in Smallville. I mean, red kryptonite didn't come up a lot, but it did pop up every so often. I mean, granted, it's not as like common as green kryptonite, but still. It was just, that was a bit part of that show, so I thought it was kind of interesting that was in this show as well. So that's what kind of made me think like, okay, is that a thing in the comic books, or is that just something specifically for the shows? Because even the shows do it a little bit differently from one another, because red kryptonite, if memory serves me correctly, in Smallville, red kryptonite was just kryptonite. It just came in different colors. But in this one, it was man-made kryptonite. It was made specifically by Maxwell Lord, that son of a gun. Basically, he made it because he wanted a weapon against Nam and his the other Kryptonians that follow him, because he found out about kryptonite being their weakness. And he basically wanted to make his own, because, he couldn't get his hands on any regular kryptonite, so he made his own kryptonite. I mean, it was meant to, kill Nam and his people, but I mean, if it hurt Supergirl at the same time, I don't think he really cared. But it ended up having an adverse effect to what he believed it was going to. So basically, it led to Kara kind of acting out the whole situation. Basically, the entire episode is focusing on that aspect of her, showing kind of as the episode's title implies, it's called Falling. It's like her falling from being like this like praised superhero to being like a threat. Basically, she kind of got a little snarky and kind of got the upper hand on Siobhan on some cases. Siobhan, side note, got herself fired because she saw a video of Kara, Supergirl, fighting an alien for a little bit, and then she just let him get away, and she wanted Kat to kind of post the make a headline out of it, but like Kat wasn't going for it, so Siobhan was going to do it, send it over to someone at the Daily Planet. It was never expressly shown, but obviously Kara gave it to Kat and showed it to her, and Kat fired Siobhan. She even made it so that like she said she talked to Perry to make it so that even if she after leaving there, after getting fired, she made it so that she couldn't even get a job at the Daily Planet even if she wanted to. So. But, besides that, she acted very crazy in this episode. There was that scene in the club or whatever that she was there with Wynn as well as James. And since I'm talking about Wynn, I do love that moment earlier in the episode. She was looking for Wynn because Kat was like, oh, find, Wynn. And when she went to look for Wynn and ended up using her x-ray vision on a door and ended up seeing him and Siobhan, and they're having sex, and it grossed her out. Love that. Super awkward. But anyway, she was in this club or whatever with, kind of like closing in on Jimmy, just because, like I said before, it's not like it makes you act like it makes you act like your deepest desire kind of way. It's like what's inside of you comes to the surface, and basically how she felt about James was kind of coming to the surface, and she was being a little pushy, even talking smack about Lucy, just being like, oh, she's this and that. And then when James was kind of walking away from her, she grabs his arm super tight and starts pulling on him like, wow, if you're not even holding back, if you're not careful, you could end up ripping his arm off. She kind of goes off on Alex, telling Alex how essentially how pathetic she is, that she's always been jealous of her. The fact, and without Kara, Alex's life would have nothing, and it's like, oh man, you're hurting people's feelings. Like, it's like, oh, that's your sister you're talking about there. Like I said, and it was interesting because in the beginning she was a little more forceful. She like I said earlier, a little snarky, but then it turned into scary because like she was meeting up with Kat as Supergirl, and she just tossed her off the Catco building, and she was plummeting, and Supergirl caught her at the last second, but she still went around causing lots of problems around the city. Even Kat had to kind of declare to the city like, okay, Supergirl isn't mentally well right now, but we at Catco can no longer support her. Like, she didn't want to do it, but she had to do it because she knew there was some other reason why Supergirl was acting the way she was, but she couldn't take the chance that people's lives might be in danger because she's in this state she's in right now. So basically the entire city essentially turns against her. And then when it came down to it, Alex and the DEO, is that their name? I always forget their initials. But, you know, her and the group kind of tried to take Kara down. Doesn't work out at all. And Kara's even about to kill Alex. Hank is there, and he can't let that happen. So he reveals himself. You know, he transforms into his real form and fights Kara, which was pretty epic. And he took her down, you know, with a little assistance from Alex, who shot the gun that Maxwell lured him in, which I'm like, which pisses me off. I know he wanted to help to kind of make up for everything he did, but it was like, you wouldn't have to make up for anything if you didn't do this in the first place. You literally ruined everything. I mean, he literally ruined Kara's life. I mean, you know, this whole situation ended up turning bad because of him. Things between her and Jimmy are kind of in a bad place. Like, Jimmy was like, I need my space from you. And, you know, the whole city's against Supergirl, and it's all his fault. I mean, because Alex said it the best way. Like, she said, because you thought of her as a monster, you finally turned her into the monster you've always thought she was. And it's just like, yeah, his paranoia and hatred of aliens led to him doing that. But it also, when it came down to it, like, Alex is telling John to run away because he, like I say, he revealed himself, and she's like, just go. But instead of running away, he reverts back into Hank and then, you know, surrenders. And then you had that senator lady like talking to him when he's like in locked up in one of those cells, and she's like, that for a second, you know, she'd always been afraid of aliens, but, you know, he kind of helped her see that there's kind of a different way, that you don't have to be afraid that not all aliens are bad. But she was just like, you know, everything you told me was a lie. Because at the beginning of the episode, you kind of see her and Hank talking, and she like touches Hank's hand, and Kara's kind of like, whoa. So obviously she kind of had a thing for him, but that's quickly gone now that her and the entire, I gotta remember this organization's name is like the DOE, another name, something like that. So basically, you know, at the very end, you have Kara talking to Kat, and she's kind of apologizing. She, like I said earlier, she admitted that, you know, it wasn't 100% her, but on some level, all the things she did and said, like, she felt that somewhere inside. So, but Kat's like, I'm not going to tell you that it's going to be easy, you know, getting the city back on your side. I said it won't be easy doesn't mean it won't be impossible. And she's like, if anyone can do it, it's you. It just sucks, dude. Because it's like, it wasn't her fault, but still, I don't know. We'll just have to see like how Kara kind of bounces back from this. I mean, how do you do that when the entire city looks at you kind of like, I mean, it'd be kind of interesting to see how they're going to depict that in the next, episodes. Like, how far the city will go to be against her now, even if she is better now, even if she's helping, will they be willing to accept her help at this point? It makes you wonder how she'll have to go about things. Now, moving on to this week's episode of Gotham. We have Penguin still being a part of Strange's experiments. There's that little twisted moment at the beginning where he's like hooked up to the machine and he's like basically seeing himself tied to a chair and he's talking to his mom. And then there's another him sneaking up behind his mom and whacks her with the bat. And it's like, wow, that's pretty messed up. And basically, Hugo puts Penguin through like multiple tests to see if he is, to see if he'll act the way he normally has been. He had prior to now, he had been acting, his typical way, but lately he's been more docile. And basically they run all these tests to make sure that he's still, that he's not going to act violently. And like near the end of the episode, we end up having him like, Hugo went as far as saying like, oh, now you're completely cured. And that basically he gives him a certificate and lets Penguin go. He's like, oh, you've been cured. So the only reason why you were sent here is because you were mentally unstable. But now we're going to let you go. And it's like, oh. And the nurse that works with Hugo is like, is it wise to let him go? And Hugo is basically like, I have plans for Mr. Cobblepot. And it's like, okay. That's not sinister at all. And part of me, I will say this, I kept thinking, like, parts of last episode, but also at the beginning of this, I'm like, Penguin's faking, isn't he? But then there was that moment that, like, he was talking to Hugo, and Hugo was like, yeah, you're not lying, Penguin, because I know you, I'd know if you were. So I was like, oh, so this is for real. And by the course of that all those events, I'm like, okay, he wasn't faking. I was so sure he was faking it. I was like, on some level, I was like, he's got to be faking this, right? It's like, no, he looks like he's a somewhat stable human being now, but which makes me wonder, like, at what point is he going to kind of revert back to himself? Is he going to become like who he was at, prior to ending up in Arkham, or is he going to be worse? Because I feel like, what if like Hugo's experiment kind of like short circuits his brain at some point? And it ends up turning him into a worse person, like becoming the psychopathic Penguin that you know him to be, that he has the potential to be. Or is it going to be something Hugo himself does? Is it something like, oh, like the experiment implanted something inside of Penguin's brain and Hugo's going to activate it whenever he gets the chance? Something like that? Maybe I'm just overthinking it. Most likely. We also have a little bit of a thing. It pops in and out in the episode. We have Lee going to Gordon asking about Kristen Kringle, a.k.a. What's his name? Nigma, Ed's girlfriend, the one he killed, but no one else knows she's dead. Lee basically went to Gordon because she hasn't been coming to pick up her paychecks, and she hasn't talked to her in a while, because Lee and Kristen, I guess, they kind of had like gained a friendship, but like she hasn't come to pick up her paychecks and Lee doesn't know where she is. So it's like she asked Jim to look into it, and Jim does. He even asked Ed about it, but Ed's kind of like, oh, I don't know anything. And then Jim's like, okay, I'll look into it myself. And he's just like, I love it because it, like, Ed took it as a challenge. She's like, oh, you're going to come at me like that? It's like, he went a little nuts in this episode because he's thinking like, Jim, like, he went to Jim later on in the episodes like, oh, like, have you heard anything about on the whole Kristen front? And he's like, oh yeah, honestly, I kind of got sidetracked by other stuff, other things that happened this episode. And so he's like, I haven't had a chance to really look into it, but I will. He's like, I'll let you know. He's like, oh, okay, you be sure to do that. And then when Gordon walks away, he's just muttering to Nigma is muttering to himself. He's just like, you'll let me know. He's like up here. He's basically like, you're up here pretending like you don't know, that you're not already suspicious of me. He's like, all right, you want to play these games, Jim? Fine, I'll play these games. And it's like, Jim's not suspicious like of you at all. I mean, at least not to me. It looks like he might have like a little twinkle of an idea that's like, okay, you might have something to do with it, but it don't even seem like he's paying you any attention. It's like, it seems like Ed's just like, in his mind, he's like, oh, it's obvious that Jim's figured it all out and he's trying to trick me into going into a false sense of security. It's like, no, he won't get me. I'll get him first. And he even has like a moment later on in the episode when he draws his giant, like he there's a newspaper picture of Jim and he puts a question mark over it, right? Which is just, obviously leading to him, becoming, I don't know. I do like seeing him kind of descend further and becoming the Riddler. I mean, granted, he was already the Riddler to begin with because he was just like, popping out riddles and stuff like that all the time. It's kind of interesting too. He used to be kind of go-lucky. He'd make wisecracks with his riddles and stuff like that, try to have a little bit of fun. To him, he's like, nope, he's dead serious now. So I'll be interested to see how he, in what ways he goes after Jim from now on. Like, it's like where that goes. And then probably like the biggest part of this story, this episode is Bruce. He finally gets a gun from Selena, obviously without telling Alfred about it. But him and Alfred go looking for matches. They end up chasing down an associate of his, a guy named Cupcake. Weird names, but basically, Alfred tries speaking to Cupcake, but Bruce being Bruce kind of opens his mouth and he's like, oh, I'm Bruce Wayne. So they say like, oh, you're that rich kid. So basically pay me. He's like, I'll pay you if you give me information on matches. And Alfred's up there like, Master Bruce, stop. But the guy's like, okay, $1 million. He's like, that's too much. He's like, all right, how about 50,000? And he's like, okay. And so essentially, the guy's like, you know what? I'll take the 50,000 and I want to fight your butler. Basically, he's like, that's the way we do it here. And Alfred's like, okay. And basically he tells Bruce, I wish you had shut your mouth. He's like, this would have worked out so much better if you just shut your mouth. But then Bruce is kind of like, well, with the way things are and with the way this guy is, I kind of feel like it would have led to this anyway. And Alfred ends up fighting the dude. It's pretty, awesome how he handles the whole situation. Granted, most of the fight, he gets, the crap beaten out of him, but he does come out on top somewhat at the end. He ends up passing out, ends up back in the hospital. And Bruce at that time sneaks off to go track down matches. Specifically at this point, he went to talk to a woman named Jerry because she's the only person that knows how to get, find matches. Jim and Harvey go to the hospital and talk to Alfred, and Alfred reveals to Jim what Bruce is going to do and what Bruce's intentions are. Bruce ends up going to like a club or whatever that the lady Jerry is at, and they have like, it's kind of like a costume party, and they have like I guess it's a projector. They're playing that whole video that Jerome and the Maniacs made, back in the first half of the season, where they had hit the GCPD station, and basically he ends up talking to a very interesting. Jerry's a very interesting woman. That's the only way I can put it. That whole conversation she had with him, I don't know. Like, I don't know what to think about Jerry. She's just weird and a little bit of crazy, and I don't know. Anyway, she ended up playing a little hard to get in the beginning. She's like, matches has killed like a lot of people. So, have you ever killed anyone before? And Bruce was like, no. But he's like, no one's ever killed my parents before. So basically he's saying like, I've never killed anyone before. But this situation makes it so that I have to put myself in a situation to kill this guy for killing my parents. After a little while of talking, he eventually Jerry ends up telling him where Matches is. Bruce goes, meets up with Matches, talks to him a little bit just to make sure he's got the right guy. Pulls the gun on him and is about to shoot him. And because originally Matches was like, I don't know your parents. And in that moment, I'm like, he's not the killer, is it? There's no way he's the killer, but he's like, oh no, I remember now. Basically it seemed like he took all the clues that Bruce had given him and it just kind of inferred from there. But he, was kind of egging Bruce on the entire time, and Bruce has got the gun. He's like, okay, now steady the gun and basically, aim a little higher and then shoot me. And then Bruce was like, you want me to kill you? And he's like, why? He's like, you could a person can only get away with doing so much bad for so long. Like, he's gotten away from doing so many bad things that he's just like, I've gone unpunished and I need to be punished. You're kind of my punishment. And Bruce, is contemplating it, but then he stops. He's like, no. He's like, I wanted you to be a monster, but it turns out you're just a man. And so Bruce leaves. Jim shows up, but at that moment, Matches puts a gun to himself and kills himself. So they officially, at this point, it's like, okay, he confessed to Bruce, so it's like, okay, the whole Wayne case is closed. But it's like, I don't know, I feel like obviously he lied about everything. That's what I feel like, that he just said what Bruce wanted to hear just so that Bruce would kill him, because he wanted to die, just because he was sick of being the bad guy that he was. And I don't know, maybe he really was the guy. I mean, it does make you wonder, how will Bruce handle. I mean, his quote unquote revenge has been his revenge has been gained to a certain extent, obviously, because he still doesn't know who hired Matches, if Matches was the actual guy. Which, I mean, now that I think about it, yeah, Matches, it totally could have just been Matches, but I totally feel like, no, Matches, it was lying, but I don't know. And at the very end, we have Bruce leaving to go live on the streets with Selena. Basically, he wants to see the other side of Gotham. He feels like if he wants to really kind of weed out the evil in Gotham, he kind of it's not just the people themselves, it's kind of the city. It's just the city breeds evil, sort of, and is basically he wants to see the kind of underbelly of Gotham so that he can understand it a little bit better and eventually in the future save it. That's how I break it down. He tells Alfred not to look for him, so we'll just have to see where it goes from there. Now, moving on to this week's episode of Lucifer, where we have Lucifer trying to enjoy, starting over. It's his quote-unquote birthday, to an extent. He even has Chloe and Dan showing up. Granted, he didn't want Dan showing up. He was super excited to see Chloe, but not so much for Dan. He just, his wings are burnt. He's kind of starting anew, trying to enjoy it, have a little bit of fun, kind of reinvent himself. We have Chloe still looking into that whole dirty cop situation. Obviously, to every other cop except for Dan, everyone except for Dan thinks she let the case go. But we also had the return of that cop who was shot, who was about to be dead until Amenadal brought him back. Still don't know why he did that. But that cop Malcolm, he's like, yeah, I'm back. He's kind of joking around with Dan and Chloe. And he kind of shows up later on in the episode, talk to Chloe and kind of tells her that, he got shot. Because he kind of pieced it together himself. He's like, oh, the person that shot me was another cop. And he's like, he could tell, he's like, Chloe, you kind of figured, you came to that same assumption as me. Essentially, he was saying he was meeting with an informant, the guy he was exchanging money with, to look into this whole dirty cop situation. That's when him and his informant got shot. He kind of advises Chloe to kind of back off the whole thing, but Chloe kind of is the way she is, so she's not going to back away from something like this. So we also have Lucifer apologizing to Dr. Martin, where she and they kind of reach, kind of go back, and she kind of talks about the fact is that it was a good thing that he punched the wall, that he acted like that, because that means he's kind of tearing down his own walls that he kind of hides himself behind. And Lucifer's like, let's not tear them. How about we build those back up? He wants her to examine Chloe because he's like, he doesn't understand why she keeps going back to her ex Dan, and he's just like, he's such a douche. Why does she keep going back to him? And Dr. Martin's like, oh, obviously because you're jealous. And Lucifer's like, I'm not jealous. Like me, I don't get jealous. And this week's case was the victim was a therapist to cheaters. He basically told arranged it so that people basically cheat. That's how they keep their relationship good. It's like, oh, you go off and cheat, but maintain your relationship. And Lucifer uses this as a chance to get Dr. Martin and Chloe, to work together. So Dr. Martin can work her magic. He even sleeps with a judge to make the whole thing official, because they could bring on, psychologist / therapist to help with the case. But Chloe was like, no, we'll just have to, the court will appoint one, and it's up to the judge to decide who. And he slept with the judge to make sure that Dr. Martin was the one that she picked. Very classy. Very, very classy. A really good, and that's probably like, that whole angle is probably one of my favorite parts of this episode, was just how irritated he was about this whole like Dan situation. He's just like, every time he saw Dan, like he might be having fun talking to Chloe, and he sees Dan, and it's just like, it just ruined his day, which is, it's amazing, because he's always been the cool, calm, collected guy. And it's always interesting when you see those, like, those slips of like humanity kind of sneak up on him. And it's just like Dr. Martin keeps telling him that he's jealous, and he's like, I'm not jealous. Like, why can't anyone else get that? Why am I the only one that gets that? Because, it's kind of a new concept for Lucifer too, because it's like, he's used to always getting what he wants, with the exception of Chloe, of course. Another favorite high point of mine for this episode was when that guy, his name was Ricky, was trying to kill himself. It was nearing the end that he said, like, aren't you supposed to tell me I have a lot to live for? And Lucifer was like, I wish I could, Ricky, but it just seems like life for you is extremely bleak. And then he was like, basically, he's like, it can only, like, you're kind of at the bottom of the barrel. It's like, life can only go up from here. And the guy was kind of inspired by it. He's like, yeah, you know what? You're right. Lucifer was like, I wasn't trying to, like, pep you up, but sure, whatever, let's go. So, basically, the relationship between Lucifer and Dr. Martin kind of changes nearing the end of the episode, because she decides that she no longer wants there to be a sexual side to their relationship. She wants there to be more of a professional side. Now, part of me wonders, is that because she's kind of in love with him and, doesn't want to kind of get caught up in that whole, like, sex, just doesn't, like, I don't know, because she kind of admitted, she's like, the fact is that they have sex a lot, it's kind of, it's not a good thing, and it kind of makes her feel, she kind of really didn't say anything, she kind of made kind of a face, and so I don't know whether it's because she knows how he feels about Chloe, or whether she actually is trying to be a professional, because she's so swayed by him. It's like every time she comes around him, she kind of loses control. So, but we end up finding out that basically the killer in this case was a guy who was basically in love with the victim's wife. Like he was cheating on his wife, because this whole thing was meant for other people. Basically, he started this whole like cheating therapy just so that he could have an excuse to cheat. It was basically to cover up his cheating. And basically, the guy who was kind of like a friend to his wife, he was secretly in love with her, and he was jealous. The fact is that no matter what wrong he did, his wife still loved him and went back to him, and just wasn't, he could never take her husband's place. And Lucifer was talking to him. He's like, I can't believe it. Your situation and my situation could not be any different. And it's so, and you even had that kind of moment where him and Chloe are talking, and Chloe kind of tells him that too. He's like, yeah, your situations are totally different. And he's just kind of off in his own little world, because, it's all affecting him a little different. I think, whether he'll admit it or not, he saw the similarities. He just didn't want to admit it. Pretty big reveals happening near the end of the episode, where we have Lucifer confronting Mozzie King. And we have Lucifer confronting Maz about working with Amenadal, because he realized, that Amenadal had, found out about Dr. Martin, and the only person that would have told him was Maz. And he's like, you know what? She's like, I did it for us. I did it for you. And he's like, no, you did it for yourself. And she's about to say something. He's like, no, Maz, we're done. Me and you were done. I mean, I knew that was going to come back to bite her in the ass somehow. And then the big reveal, a little earlier on, Chloe ended up piecing it together that basically the only other person that would know where Malcolm was during that whole situation before he got shot, the only other person that would know would be his partner. And which I called it like last episode of a Not Too Comic Book, that was totally going to be her partner. But they end up finding him. He's dead. He shot himself and left a suicide note. And then at the very end, it's revealed that he's may or may not be a dirty cop. It seems like the dirty cop is actually Dan. And Malcolm figured this out because Malcolm knows that Dan was the one that shot him. So either Malcolm's partner was dirty and he was just collateral damage, or he really wasn't dirty. So that kind of threw me for a loop. Like someone literally, what was it? I think it was like Matt on Superhero Roundup. I think he threw out the theory that it was Dan. I was like, there's no way. And it turns out to be Dan. Holy crap. How do you guess that? Like, I would have never guessed it was Dan, but I won't lie. Like throughout the episode, I was like, could it be Dan? I was like, there's no, I'm being stupid. There's no way it's Dan. Yeah, it's totally the partner. And he winds up dead, and he's and then when Chloe and Dan were hugging, I'm like, the way he's kind of looking is like, Dan's the bad guy, isn't it? It's like, no. Yep, he's the bad guy. So Lucifer already doesn't like him, so I don't know, maybe on some level he knew underneath that Dan isn't trustworthy, but we'll just see how everything goes next episode. But that's really all I want to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.